very good evening and thank you for joining us. We are coming to you from the La Palm Royal Beach in Accra, Ghana, on the sidelines of the Forum on Internet Freedom that has been taking place, organized by CIPESA, a Center for Research and Analysis of Information aimed to enable policymakers understand ICT policy issues. Tonight we'll be talking about the media in this new era. We'll be talking about arrests, we'll be talking about the internet, we'll be talking about fake news and all of that. So let's say it as it is. So I'll introduce my guests for tonight and I'll start right next to me. Maria Sarungi Sahai, did I say that right? Yes. Maria is from Tanzania. She is a communication expert. And right next to her is Dorothy Mukasa, who is a journalist by training, who practiced for a couple of years till 2015 when she abandoned. Abandoned? I didn't abandon. Oh, okay. She has a background in TV, radio, and also in print media, and she's currently advocating for digital rights with Unwanted Witness Uganda. And finally, Charles Onyango Bo. I am so glad that I caught you.
I'm glad you caught me too.
Charles is a publisher, curator at Africapedia, Kenya. He was a founder and managing editor at the Daily Monitor, Uganda. In 2003, he moved to the Nation Media Group in Nairobi as its first managing editor for Media Convergence. He writes weekly columns for the Daily Monitor, Daily Nation in Kenya, The Citizen, Tanzania, and the regional weekly, The East African. Thank you all so much for, I know it's been a very, very cumbersome 2 days, but that you've taken the time to share your insights with us. We really, really appreciate that. So we're in the era of the internet, and we must talk about the role that the media plays in this current generation. We must talk about the competition that the media is facing. But before we even get into that, I would like to understand from you what you think media is in these modern times.
I think that as a communication expert, the first thing that comes to my mind is a well-known communication expert, deceased Marshall McLuhan, who said that the medium is the message. And what has happened is the medium that we're using today is digital. So it's social media. Yeah. At that time, he was talking about television and the impact it will have, and we've moved into the digital world. That means that when we talk about media today, for many of the younger generation, especially those who were born at the turn of the century, they do not think of what some of us think of media as the real media. They call it the old media, the conventional media. And for them, the real media is social media. Is it true that it is? Of course not. We are in a transition period. So what we're actually seeing is that we're transitioning from that more old or analog system into a digital system, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the analog form is going to die out, but it's going to adapt.
Oh, Charles, you've been around for quite a while. Is quite a while a good enough word to describe? Okay. What's it been like for you watching this whole transition from back in the day when media was what it was to now when social media seems to be the thing?
You see, it's very interesting. I mean, if you go back 100 years, they were, and it had to be the British, they arrogantly described news as the day's intelligence. And so, and that implied two things. They meant that there was a lot of rubbish, but to make informed economic and business decisions, there were some nuggets of information that were useful for the day. And a whole class of people who then decided what that news is arose. And the striking thing, if you see, for example, in the 20th century, and a lot of talk became about the format. So the newspaper became a very big deal. You know, the big, impressive printing presses. The medium of the TV became a big deal. And, you know, we had a whole routine developed around TV news. Are you good for TV? Are you bad for TV? And today we are in a point where, because of the disruptions of digital technology, we've almost gone back to 120 years ago, where the importance was the story, was the intelligence of the day. rather than the platform on which it was consumed. So it's really very fascinating to see that it took a very, very modern and very forward-looking technology to take us 120 years back. So, you know, that fascinates me. And along with that, it has removed the power of these ball-wearing men who used to decide what the world should consume as the day's intelligence, and has democratized news. So to me, when I think of news today and what the digital platforms on which we consume it in and social media, is how much it has democratized it, removed the wise men and women who thought only this is good for the public, and really shared out the power to many more people to determine what is important for the day. And I find that to be exciting.
Okay. Dorothy, what do you think?
Totally agree with Charles. We are seeing more and more people becoming journalists, reporters. You know, a lot of information. Gone are the days when you used to wait for NTV News, for example, at 7.
We're waiting for NTV News.
You do wait, but even NTV itself posts its news on social media. So we keep following NTV on social media until we get to the point of the news bulletin itself. So that means there's a lot of news that keeps circulating in society, even before the official news broadcast itself. So it's opening up doors, but I also believe it's not phasing out the real journalism, okay? I look at social media as a platform that's really contributing, bringing opportunities to more journalists, you know, participating in producing their own news, you know, and also, you know, giving broader circulation of news to citizens, but also to as many people as possible. But we are also running away from only journalists, the official journalists in the newsrooms.
Which was bringing me to my question, because now everybody has access to these platforms where they can put out information and be heard. So everybody is a journalist. Is that necessarily a good thing?
For news consumers, it's a good thing, okay? Because trust me, journalists will not be in all places, and they will not produce all the news. Like Charles said, the gatekeepers, you know, you don't produce everything, you don't release everything. So what happens to the news that the editors have withheld or thrown in the trash? So that's where the citizen journalism really plays a critical role in bringing out every news. So it's about the consumer to select, you know, I'll take this, I'll not take this, or so for now, with the digital technology, we will go with the citizen journalism, but the issue of streamlining with the fake news, genuine news, so that's now a different level.
Yes, so that's actually where I was going, but Maria, you wanted to say something?
Yes. I just wanted to say that the citizen journalism that we call citizen journalism may not necessarily fall into the category of being a real journalist standard, and that one we have to accept as a fact. But I think that the role of the media is actually to take that information, as you know, we've all agreed that it's a form of democratization, and the role of the media is to fact check, to make sense of it, to give it a larger context, and not to just consume it. Right now, the biggest problem that we're seeing with the conventional media is they're trying to play catch up with the citizen journalism, which is a pity. Their role is not to be the first one to come up with the news, or to be there to film when soldiers are having some altercation with the citizens. I think their role is mainly to source that information, look around. Sometimes you find citizens have got better footage than the camera crew, but that doesn't mean that they are journalists in the strictest sense. The role of the media will come to say that once we have this information, even from the citizens, what do we do with it, and how do we standardize it, and then how do we then return it for consumption? And I do agree with what Charles said as well, that yes, today the gatekeepers are not going to be necessarily the conventional media, but they still are in a very big way. And that's why I said I don't see the media fading away. I think that what you said, the people who control the intelligence, or the wise people behind, will still be looked upon, but that those wise people may not be always bow-tied man.
No. One of the things, if you look at news as knowledge, how has knowledge developed historically? It begins in very crude forms. I mean, There was a time when surgery was performed by butchers, but you can see how sophisticated surgery has become. So if you look at a bit of the chaos and the noise and the fake news and the lies, if you look at it as typical of all the development of human knowledge, it presents an opportunity for us to develop new tools. So for example, you take things like fake or photoshopped photographs. We now have apps and tools which very quickly help you tell. So it is actually an opportunity, and that we're going to have a whole ecosystem. So the editor, you will still have the editors and the truth checkers, but they will be very different. There will be the app that points out the fake, that this thing is in the wrong place, that will catch the fact. So if you look at it, it's a creative opportunity for a very totally different kind of citizen.
Yeah. Who do you think is setting the narrative now for media houses? And for our public, who's setting it?
I think that it's primarily the so-called social media influencers, and the social media influencers can vary.
You said so-called.
So-called, and the reason I'm saying that is there has become now more and more a buzzword, and then they're trying to set up a criteria. Is it how many followers you have? Okay. Now they're finding out recently with all the research they've done, as Charles has pointed out, with some of the apps and everything, that some people may have only 2,000 followers, but the reach and the impact is bigger. So the reason I put it into quotation marks is because it's still not clear who these social media influencers are. So the terminology may be there, but how do we determine them? How we determine them, it can be that within 24 hours, a new social media influencer will come on the site, create the narrative, push the narrative, become a trendsetter, and then fade again. Right. So what we're seeing is an ebb and flow. But I think overall the narrative is set on social media, because you see the reason it's called social media is because that's where people socialize. The so-called cornerstones where people used to sit and talk about the latest events that they read and heard in the media is now being transferred onto the digital platforms. The same kind of discussion is happening, and they are shaping what they think. So it could be sometimes that the narrative was initially set by the media house or the conventional media, but then it is picked up by the netizens, and the netizens formulate and change what the narrative should be.
Okay, right.
Yes, it's the social media that forms the narrative. I agree, because you've seen like Sha said, the influencers, people who are followers, put up a piece, they formulate the news, the information, and also tag in the different traditional media houses. What does that mean? It means that they want the media houses to pick up this information. So at the end of the day, once it gets viral, the next thing you see, you're seeing it in the papers, you're hearing it over radio, you're seeing it on TV. So it means news is now coming from the social media to the traditional media space.
All right. Charles, I'm curious as to what you think about this whole transition.
It is, but it's not just, it's just not from, it is that we are seeing power not just going to the social, to the platform influencers, but a particular type of platform influencers, the imaginative ones. Because one of the things that had gone out of news was imagination. And go back to, I think it was early 2015, there was this, one of the biggest trending topics in Africa ever was that hashtag, if Africa was a bar.
Yeah.
The young Botswana woman who did that, when she started that thing off, she had less than 1,000 followers. And she was still living with her father in a community outside Botswana, in a village basically. The secret to her success was imagination. And if you see all the successful narratives today, they are created by imaginative people. So in that sense, it's a good thing, because that is one of the things that had died in news. The news had become too formulaic. So the possibility of people to input the social media, it's brought back a new imagination to what is the stories and what are what should capture our attention and imagination.
All right. Oh, okay.
Imagination issue brings me to, reminds me of complaints by politicians, you know, factual versus perception. So there's a lot of perception on social media. People just put out their perceptions on issues, and this becomes news. So you find recently the president was complaining of, these are not facts, you know, I'm giving you facts, but people run with a perception, and this is, you know, what's playing around in both social media and traditional media as well.
All right, Maria.
And I would like to add, as a communication expert, that my advice to the politicians who are complaining is a very old adage that says that when there is a gap between reality and perception, perception always wins. So you can't fight that. And they have to deal with the reality, because this is where the gap comes. And the reality is, because perception always wins, they need to be able to manage the narrative, even if it means not setting the narrative, but managing the narrative by ensuring that they respond very early on to these perceptions.
Yep.
And they bring the facts in a way, and that's where journalism also comes in. The facts have to be presented in a way whereby people understand what they're hearing. I mean, the minute you start churning out and you start saying, for example, something very serious like maternal mortality ratio is, I don't know, 95 to every 100,000 live birth. I mean, you know, an average citizen is going to say, oh, yeah, well, too bad. And they don't even know what you're talking about. So how do you take these facts? How do you present them? How do you make it accessible to the people, but also understandable and clear?
All right. Well, we're going to take a short break right there, and we'll continue with this conversation right after that.
We offer professional barber, hairdressing at Lugogo Mall, Garden City, Forest Mall, Oasis Mall, and Acacia Mall. Sparkle Salon, professional, affordable, and quality services.
Welcome back, and like I said earlier, we're coming to you from the La Palm Beach Resort in Accra, Ghana. So, looking at what we've said in the last segment before we took the break, what would you do, and I'll start with you, Charles, if you were a younger you starting out in the media today?
Oh, well, I think really the reality today is it would have to be a very heavy platform focus, because if you know, when Jeff Bezos of Amazon bought the Washington Post, it was in deep trouble. Now, ordinarily you would think that the first thing he would have done was hire a whole bangload of smart editors and journalists. But no, one of the first things they did was they hired 260 technologists. And the secret to their success is, you know, that's one of them. So I would certainly pay a lot of attention to platforms for them, because one of the things is if I look in our own, you know, in our own family, you know, the way our children kind of, even the space, the way in which they occupy the space in the house. One of the spaces which they don't seek to occupy is the space in front of the TV. You know, they seek to occupy the space in front of their screen. And once you internalize those kind of realities, like Maria was saying, you begin to know that, look, if I'm going to talk to these people, I'm going to talk to them very differently. The second thing that I've really learned is that, you know, when we started out in journalism, it was very important to be an authoritative voice. But because of the nature of the changes in our societies, there is a lot of resentment to an authoritative voice or a voice of power. You have to be more inclusive. You have to bring a more egalitarian voice if people are to pay attention to. And the difference between that and what news was 20 years ago is like day and night. So there are those things that the way technology and even, you know, and for example, we are soon reaching a situation where 50% of the children who will become adults in the next 5 or so years will have been raised by single parents.
Yep.
Now, the things that single parents are very different from, you know, they don't grow up in the home of the male figure who sits at the top of the table. They have a much more cooperative relationship and supportive relationship with their parents, and they bring that attitude to the way they consume news. So those are the kind of things I would take into account in ways in which I wouldn't have done 15, 20 years ago.
I love the question, and what I wanted to say is you don't have to be younger. I just think you have to be younger, not by the age, but by thinking. So one of the things that definitely with my company I'm doing is going into media, but new media. And I completely agree with Charles in very important aspect that nobody thinks about. And we often think that this is only happening in the West, but it's happening in Africa more rapidly, and I think that we are just not even seeing it anymore, which is consuming media on demand. There was a conversation around the news, and you tried to defend, of course, that, you know, people still go and watch the 8 o'clock or 7:30 p.m. news. The truth is, no, they don't. The truth is, the ones who sit down to watch TV is not even those who are in their 30s and 40s onwards, but are those who are in their 60s, 70s onward. So if you're seeing that even the middle-aged people are starting to now say that they're consuming through, whether it's Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube, they're consuming their media and their news from there, it means that the change is very rapid. Now, what is going to happen? What is going to happen is that if we don't wake up in this part of the world, we're going to have African news coming to us from Silicon Valley. And they will have the copyright, they will own it, they will be the ones getting the correspondence here to do it, but the content is going to be owned by them and shaped by them. Whether it's going to be the breaking news or whether it's going to be an analytical piece, but they will own it. So my biggest concern at this moment in time is local content. And a few years back, when I went and I was trying to follow up about local African content, just to ask what is happening, what I found was there were already some serious investors buying up rapidly African local content, including entertainment, some of the news pieces, and they're buying up.
And they're going to sell it back to us.
They're going to sell it back to us. And the truth is, we still sit here and say, oh, you know, our people will not buy media. But trust me, within very, very rapidly, within few years, I'm giving it maximum 5 years, you're going to have people ready to pay. It's going to be very little. It's not going to be a lot of money. Very little, just like we are buying airtime right now. We all need to buy airtime. It will reach a point, local content is going to become very valuable. So for me, for the media here in Africa, I think we need to wake up very fast.
Right. What do you, because our time is very fast, I can't really dwell on one thing. What do you think about clickbait headlines? That our media is constantly trying to just put out anything, exaggerate things even, and we'll see from some newspapers, to get people more to buy them.
I think the media and the practitioners themselves are some kind of a panic, you know, which is so unnecessary. They need to calm down. I think they need to realize the fact that they hold value despite the fact that there is social media. This is what my sister hinted on before. You need to do more than what the social media does. If, for example, a citizen journalist, you know, posts something, do it the professional way.
Like you said, what are you using that information
Exactly,
for? Okay.
exactly. Then remain credible, bring out more information, you know, do some investigative piece about it, you know, make it bigger, give it an angle that really attracts, you know, be different from the citizen journalist, but, you know, because we also, as individuals in the media, we want to get those more tweets, the likes, the followers, you know. So we go by the trends and then the end, mess up our names, but also tint our media houses.
Although it is, you know, I have a slightly different view on what people call clickbait, because one of the things that has happened, and again, you must really be aware in which times and consumption change, because if you think of clickbait, clickbait is not any different from your shop window, you know, or the neon sign on your bar. It is really that. And you know, if you see some of the people who do some of the best work, BuzzFeed, they are accused of being, you know, merchants of clickbait. But they have done, I think, the honorable thing, that if you have a nice shop front window and someone comes in, what do you offer them? So I think that the fact that someone tries to catch your attention is itself communicates, I think, a very, very significant message, that this person cares about you enough to catch your attention and wants you to pay it. I think that the focus should be if the person gets past the clickbait.
What's inside?
What does he or she find?
Yeah. So it's got to be more than just the outrage that's on the outside to the information that is on the inside. Do you think that state repression is the biggest threat to the media?
Sorry, I didn't catch the bit.
Do you think that state repression is the biggest threat to the media?
To me, yes and no.
And the media online, yes.
Yes and no, because as media practitioners, we're also a threat to ourselves, you know. We've accepted to be used by different people, be it the state. For example, you hear the malls within the media houses, spies, people who spy on their failed journalists, you know. What does that mean? It really implies that, you know, while I'm practicing in my own media house, I'll not be free, okay? And I'll also be highly self-censure myself, because I know, you know, once I undertake on an assignment, somebody's out there to look out for me, okay? But on the other part, yes, because you know, there's a lot of laws, both online and offline, that you find states using offline laws like libel to charge journalists who are publishing online. So it also creates a lot of fear that you see, like the Computer Misuse Act, which for instance has been used for over 25 people in 2017 in 1 year. So journalists are in and out of courts, you know, and maybe people respond to situations differently. We don't all have those tough skins that will withstand a withdrawal, for instance, and she might carry on despite the repression. So it's also in a way terrorizes the media. But finally, that disunity amongst the media fraternity itself is playing out a lot as a threat. You know, it's a loophole that any person who wants to target the media uses. And I wouldn't doubt if somebody says the real, I mean, the powers that really trying to divide the individuals, the media players themselves amongst themselves. So, yeah.
Right. Oh, Maria, I just want us to take a break, and then we'll start with you when we return. So let's take that break. Welcome back. We're coming to you from Accra, Ghana, on the sidelines of the Internet Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa 2018. Yes, Maria, you wanted to say something about who our greatest enemy. Who's the greatest enemy of the media?
I think that we cannot start talking about that without talking about the state. There is no doubt that in Africa, particularly, the state plays a very important role in both encouraging or discouraging media freedom. And that comes from the fact that what is looked upon as the fourth pillar and the romanticizing of the role of media that we see in the West is not necessarily taken very well by many of the African states. They see, of course, that the media is also dangerous, a lot of our countries would come with the example of something like Rwanda, where they'll point out that the role that radio played in the genocide and encouraging it. So there are those examples which will quickly come to their mind because they're trying to restrict the area that media plays.
What happened in Cameroon with the shutdown of the internet?
The shutdown of the internet in Cameroon, but also we've seen the detention of a lot of the journalists, not only in Uganda but everywhere around Africa. So we cannot say that the state, is not that much of a threat. It is the primary enemy if it decides to be. And why do I say that? Sometimes you find that the state does it in a soft way, and what they do is, for example, they co-opt journalists by giving them positions. We've seen it, for example, in Tanzania, that not only now, but going way back, a couple of at least a decade now, a lot of the journalists become regional commissioners, district commissioners. So it encourages, and as editors, senior journalists, so it encourages them that they need to be very nice with the sitting regime, because that could be an opportunity.
And journalism, does it pay well? It doesn't really pay well.
Of course it doesn't pay well, and then not only that, but it's a huge privilege, right? Because then you become appointed, then you become a civil servant, and then you get a vehicle, you get, good allowances. There's all these benefits that come with it. So I think that we have to look at it that way too. It's not necessarily about putting people in jail, but it could be a form of co-opting, so that suddenly the journalists are not encouraged to look that hard at some of the things that the state is doing. But I would like to point out that there's one important factor that, during this conference it came up, is the media owners themselves. Who are the media owners? If the media owners are also linked somehow to the state itself doesn't even need to engage the journalist or the media directly. They will just go and reach out to the media owners and then fine-tune through the media owners what they want to happen. But then, even if sometimes, if it's business, pure business interest, private interest, we see that the private interest also may want to have that extra license in mining or an extra license in some other activity outside the media. So they will encourage the practitioners not to, go after that much the government. So I think that we have got a whole load of people or key stakeholders that we need to pay attention to. I wouldn't label them enemies, but I would say that the interests may not necessarily align with the ideals that we operate in.
Whenever I say this, people are surprised, given my long battles with the powers that be and my friend Yoweri. But because I don't have a very romantic and idealistic view, I do recognize that virtually everywhere in the world where there is a free press, people have fought for it. So I just think that there is often this sense that the Constitution can grant us press freedom. I think that is too easy a way out. We have to fight for it. We've got to take some knocks for it. The second thing is that whereas state repression is a problem, it's not the threat to journalism. I think if you see states, government repression is a signal that you can use, that actually you can do this journalism differently, you can do better. And I think that historically a lot of innovation has come, particularly if you look, if you take a broad view of how journalism emerged. State repression has been the great source of some of the best theater and poetry and literature in the world. So my own view is that I often see state repression as a challenge, a signal, as opposed, to noise, for us to necessarily do better, so that the threat to journalism remains bad journalism and journalists themselves. I think that if we can get our journalism right, the state repression actually will become so. They should not beat us with those guns of theirs and yell us away. But I think it's legitimate for the government to try and push back, to try to argue that its point of view is not being heard, that it's not being treated fairly. It has a legitimate right to make that claim on us and to say that we should do better.
Are there things to fear with a media, and now especially a media online, that is unchecked?
I think that with the media online, there has become like a borderline that has been washed away. And what has happened is all these African states adopting cybercrime have taken a very great liking to what they say criminalizing gossip, criminalizing rumors, which was before, if
Are
you
you
look
talking
at...
about us?
Yes, well, you know, the truth is, media does a lot of speculation at times, and even the best journalists, and we've seen cases now of New York Times and others being challenged that, you know, they are also engaging in fake news. It's not fake news. It's part of acquiring the story. Sometimes you do have to stipulate things. You do have to extrapolate, or you have to assume that because that person didn't say, but evidence shows that. The cybercrime law makes it a crime. And it's very open to what the interpretation of whether it's fake news or whether it is defamation. It's quite open. So what has happened with the media online, and we're seeing more and more of that, is there's a heightened approach by the states to make sure that online content is controlled, not managed, it's controlled. So in Tanzania recently they passed the online content regulation. It's about that. It was not enough to have the cybercrime law, but now there's the online content regulation, which specifically applies to online media and is even demanding a fee, registration. So you can see that has been heightened. Now, is it because of the possible and very plausible threat that comes from media online? Because they could, you know, they can cause revolution, they can cause chaos by misinforming the public? Probably. But then the question always comes, are they fitting the standards that we've heard during the presentations here, which are the conventions, whether, you know, it has gone through the due process? Does it mean that, you know, if you are arraigned for some reason, is the judiciary, is the police, is everybody following the international standard that we know of respecting human rights?
Well, Charles, you're not new to arrests.
No.
When you see all of what is taking place now, and in light of what she's just said, what are you thinking? What is the difference between what's happening now and when you were arrested, I don't know how many times?
Well, you know, the thing is that the Uganda situation is interesting because you still have a fight. You can go to court and win marvelous victories. You'll get your bail, and we fought. You know, we fought for that. It's true that in other countries it is terrible. I mean, journalists have disappeared in Tanzania or have turned up, chopped up in a forest. I mean, it can get precious, the things that are happening in, you know, in Cameroon. I don't actually think that it is worse today than it used to be. I think that one of the things that there tends to be, today we operate in an environment in which there is a lot more sensitivity. And, you know, with the internet and globalization and the ability of people to voice outrage, there is a lot more sensitivity, you know, towards you know, the mistreatment of journalists. But also, I think that the other thing that it tells us is that when I was starting out in journalism, when I published a story, or I mean, if my story was published, you know, it was at a point where, you know, the traditional newspaper wouldn't even be distributed around the whole of Uganda at that point. You were lucky if 100,000 people read it. But today, a young smart lad or girl, you know, woman of 21 can do a blog and potentially reach 1 billion people. So I think that it is important for people to begin also thinking that they have a reach and a power and opportunity that our generation, when we started out, couldn't even dream of. We couldn't even think we would reach 1 billion people. But today, you know, you don't even have to get out of college. You can write a blog in your pajamas and you reach, you know, 1 billion people. So in many ways, there's a gift in there which we should be able, you know, to be thankful for.
Yeah. I heard you earlier in one of the sessions, Maria, speak about the kinds of helmets that journalists should wear online, you know, to protect themselves. So we have this gear we wear going to the field to cover violent situations. What do we do online? Dorothy, I know you are a digital expert now. How do journalists protect themselves online?
I think it's important for journalists, particularly online, to acquire digital skills. Because trust me, because we're talking about journalists, but even everyone should acquire digital skills. While we are into digital technology, the governments, especially authoritarian governments like the African states, are actually busy getting all the technology, partnering with countries like China to be sure that they're able to start to surveil on us, to surveil on journalists, to trap people while communicating. So I think in the same way as vulnerable groups, the journalists and any other citizen, it's time that we consider digital security as one of the key elements that we need to acquire while going online. Another thing I would like to mention is that the profiling of online users, you know, gone are the days when they used to look at only journalists. You're now focusing on citizen journalists, you know, bloggers, netizens. So we are seeing laws coming up, or even directives that require registration of bloggers. For instance, in Uganda, UCC issued a directive that all bloggers should register and pay a fee. So for that, we are in court for that, but we also believe it's just a way of profiling people, who is doing what, you know, and also like threaten them, get them off the platforms.
And we know that now, and I was hearing somebody speak earlier today and say that you put up something, and the next time you travel maybe to another country, you've been profiled, so you're not going to be let in, or you
Exactly. It's not all about government, but everywhere, you know, everywhere, even corporations, you know, they profile.
So I'd like us to close our session, and I'd like you to all give us something to go home with. A young journalist, or a journalist all of our age, in this generation of the internet, what would you say to them?
Pick up the opportunity, you know, don't sleep over the opportunity. That it's an opportunity that has struck, you know, just grab it. Use the internet, like Charles has said, you can be a blogger. You don't have to belong to a newsroom to do your journalism. You can own a blog, you can own a website, you know. You can be powerful, provided you have the news, you have the information that's well researched, but also credible, okay? But also you can reach as many, like Charles said, so many people that beyond even your country, Uganda. If, for example, if you're in Uganda, you know, you can reach as many people as possible, and these are all opportunities. So, like we said in the beginning, the internet is a bigger market, and it's a bigger opportunity for journalism once well utilized.
All right. Maria?
I'm going to quote the blogger from Ethiopia, from Zone 9, who said to upgrade your commitment. And that is my advice to even the young journalists. They have to upgrade their commitment to what they do. And with that, I mean that today you don't need to go to school to learn the digital skills. Today you don't need to go to a special school and get a degree in order to be able to know how to fact check. If you're committed to it, if you love your profession, you'll learn to edit, you'll learn to shoot, you'll learn to research, you'll know how to go after your story. But what has become a problem actually is sometimes you find that the younger generation of journalists become lazy because they think that the technology is just there, it's going to work for them. And it's not true. Actually, because everything is so available, as we're talking about that, you have to be even more committed and even more focused and even more motivated.
All right. Thank you very much, Maria. Charles?
Well, the young journalists today have got a million opportunities that didn't exist 20 years ago. And I would just steal the Nike ad and say, just do it. But like Maria said, that, you know, you have, look, 20 years ago, if you were a young reporter and, you know, say when we're at, you know, the weekly topic in Uganda, almost invariably for a reporter to succeed, you needed, there was all this stuff, you know, your editor had to mentor you and to, what has happened today is that you can tell the bugger to go and jump in a lake. There are so many tools for you to be such a smart journalist without waiting on on your editor to give you a nod or to approve and hold your hand. There's so many free tools for you to do all these clever things and rise, to the top of the water. And the second thing is that they also have an opportunity to be actually very rich. I mean, people like Casper in South Africa, when he was 29, he was doing just video clips, and he had the hugest following in Africa, 19. So, some of these guys can become multimillionaires at 25, retire at 26, go to Hawaii, drink mojitos and sit under big umbrellas and don't have to work as long as we did. So they should actually go for it.
All right. Thank you all so much for taking the time to speak with us. Well, that was our show for tonight, and we're talking about the media in these modern times and the internet. Thank you so much for watching. NTV Weekend Edition is coming up next.
Renew your monthly basic bouquet subscription of 18,000 shillings before it expires. Then enjoy 3 free days only on StarTimes. Enjoy digital life.